It's quite brutal as a changeover.
Thank you, and goodbye.
One of the images of changes of power in Britain is the removal van in Downing Street. And of course, that has to be arranged in advance, not only because everything has to happen quite quickly, but of course because there are security implications in terms of having people moving around Downing Street and moving things out.
Even prime ministers who are quite confident of staying in number 10 have often been known to pack up boxes and to make sure that they're ready to go. Margaret Thatcher was always paranoid that she was going to sort of jinx the result.
So any prime minister, of course, because they are a candidate in this election, has to be at the count in their constituency. So they, of course, then have to travel from the count back to London. At that point, they will usually go to Downing Street to sort of thank their staff and to say their goodbyes. We'll be familiar with these images of 1997, Tony Blair. But as soon as he got through that door, he immediately received security briefings. And he was asked to write what are called letters of last resort. And these are letters which go sealed to the commanders of Britain's nuclear submarines, which are always one of them at sea somewhere on Earth. And it tells that sub-commander what to do in the event of an attack on Britain.
But the flip side of that, of course, is that as an outgoing prime minister leaves, their letters then have to be removed from those safes from the submarines and replaced by their successors. It's only when they come back into port they can swap the letters over. So for several weeks after an election, the prime minister has been booted out. The prime minister's letters are still there, but it's the former prime minister. We do know that John Major left a bottle of champagne for Tony Blair with a card which said it's a great job, enjoy it and all the very best. There will be some work that will go into preparing a victory speech if you're heading into power, but I think any prime minister will be very wise to make sure that they've got a draft of what they're going to say if they lose. These things used to be quite informal. You would have the Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, for example, was quite widely mocked for sneaking out the back of Downing Street. He didn't stand out the front and make a statement. Now we have this as almost like a sort of political ceremony that takes place.
And then, of course, the Prime Minister would head to the palace to formally resign as Prime Minister. And then, of course, this person who wields all this power, all the executive power of the government, suddenly becomes a private citizen and is no longer involved in the government of this country anymore.
It's a bit like Cinderella and the carriage turning back into a pumpkin.
Yeah, it can, I think, often be a very shocking experience.
Edward Heath came out of the Queen's drawing room and came down the stairs of Buckingham Palace to his car, and his detective, his bodyguard, shook hands with him and said, well, goodbye, sir. And he said, well, where are you going? And he said, well, I'm no longer going to be assigned to you because you're no longer entitled to have police protection from me. Another thing that happens is they find they've got a different car. Former prime ministers do get a chauffeur-driven car now, but it won't be the prime ministerial car. That's then gone off to collect their successor. So they will notice there will be changes immediately once they stop being prime minister.